Today we are going to be using your unit circle plate that you made on Friday or Thursday of last week to learn how to use them to find values on the unit circle. So we're covering more of this second objective on our 10-3 unit. So you should have your plate out on your desk. If you weren't here on one of those days, then someone should have a plate for you. If not, just share with them until you're able to get one made. So right here it tells us all the values that we need to know for sine, cosine. Remember, cosine is our x value, sine is our y, and then tangent is x over y, but we also just wrote the tangent values out here on the outside are the tangent values for those places on the unit circle as well. So if you will go to this slide in your note packet, it looks like this. We're trying to find the sine, cosine, and tangent, and cosecant, secant, and cotangent values of these different radians. They're giving us to them in radians now. So the first one says find the sine of pi. So I'm going to go to my unit circle, and I'm going to go to where pi is on my unit circle, which is out here on the outside. Here's pi. And it asks for the sine of pi. So the sine is the y value, so x comma y. So that says that the sine of pi is 0. And so I'm going to say over here that the sine of pi equals 0. Because I used the y coordinate, and I went to where it was pi on my radians. The next one asks, where is cosine 3 pi over 4? So it wants to know the x value where I'm at 3 pi over 4 on my circle. So I'll go to my circle. I'll find 3 pi over 4 is over here in the second quadrant. And I'm going to look for the, what are we doing? Cosine? Cosine. So I'm going to look for the x value of that. So that's right here. Negative square root of 2 over 2. And so when I go to write cosine of 3 pi over 2, I'll say negative square root of 2 over 2. And then the last one we have here is the tangent of 11 pi over 6. So I'll go to my circle, and I'll find 11 pi over 6. It's out here on the right in quadrant 4. And then the tangent values we just wrote out on the outside, so it would just be this over here, negative square root of 3 over 3. And when you have your plate, it's just that easy. And you will have your plate on the upcoming formative. By the time you get to your summative, you won't have the plate, so you'll have to know these values. However, on the summative, I'll give you like a blank unit circle, so you can fill that in, and then you can just reference that. All right, and then we go over to our new values that we learned, our reciprocal trig functions. We have the cosecant of 5 pi over 4. And so I'm still going to go to 5 pi over 4 on my unit circle. So I find it down here in quadrant 3. We go to 5 pi over 4. And then because it's cosecant, that's the reciprocal of sine. Remember, there's only one co that goes with each. So cosecant goes with sine, which here doesn't matter because they're the same value, but sine is y. And the cosecant, we said, is the reciprocal of that. So the cosecant of this sine value wouldn't be negative square root of 2 over 2. It'd be negative 2 over the square root of 2. And your placement of that negative isn't going to matter. It's negative whether the negative's on the top or the bottom. So my cosecant is the flip of the sine. So that would be, it's still negative 2 over the square root of 2, and you can leave it just like that for your cosecant of 5 pi over 4. I take the sine of 5 pi over 4, and I find the reciprocal. So for secant of pi over 6, I go to pi over 6 on my unit circle. And secant goes with cosine, only one co. So I go to the secant. Here's my cosine is square root of 3 over 2 of pi over 6. And so for the secant of that, I flip it. So instead of being square root of 3 over 2, oops, it'll be 2 over the square root of 3. And then the last one I have is cotangent of pi over 3, which I know cotangent goes with tangent, but it would be the reciprocal of that. So for the cotangent of pi over 3, I'll go to pi over 3 on my circle. And that's up there in the first quadrant. And so I see that the tangent is square root of 3, so it's got to have some kind of flip, so we'll call it square root of 3 over 1. So that when I go to flip that, I'll do 1 over the square root of 3. So 1 over square root of 3. So that's how I'm using my plate to find certain values of sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. On the next slide, we're doing the same thing. We're still trying to evaluate different values of radians. But this first one says sine of 13 pi over 4, and if you search your whole unit circle, you're not going to find 13 pi over 4 on it. That's because 13 pi over 4 is a coterminal angle. It's in the same place, but it's gone like a full circle around and then a little bit more. So it's in the same location as something on your plate, but I need to find the coterminal angle to be able to do that. So I'm going to go and take my 13 pi over 4. Now that's too big, right? It's not in the negatives. It's a really, really big angle. It's bigger than 2 pi. So in order to get something that is actually on my plate, I'm going to take my 13/4, and on my calculator I'm going to do 13/4 minus 2. And again, we don't put the pi in the calculator because I don't want it to estimate pi, but I know that it's going to be there. So I put into my calculator 13/4 minus 2. It gives me the decimal, 1.25. But then I hit math and enter to give me 5/4, which if I plug back in my pi then this will say that 13 pi over 4 is really the same thing as 5 pi over 4. So I can find the sine of 5 pi over 4, and that's going to tell me the same exact thing. So now if I go to my unit circle, and I find 5 pi over 4, that is on my plate. It's over there in the third quadrant. And then I look for the sine of that, so the y value of that, and it's negative square root of 2 over 2. So that means not only is the sine of 5 pi over 4 negative square root of 2 over 2, the sine of 13 pi over 4 is also negative square root of 2 over 2. I do the same thing when I come to something like the tangent of negative pi fourths. Negative pi fourths is not on my plate, right? They went in the opposite direction. They went counterclockwise. So you could think about going counterclockwise and doing that as well. Or you could just take your negative 1/4 and you can add 2 pi to that and get the same thing, something that is actually on your circle. So if I use my calculator and I do negative 1/4 plus 2, and I remember my pi still goes there, I get 7 pi fourths. So this is going to be the same thing as finding the tangent of 7 pi fourths, which is on my plate. 7 pi fourths is in the fourth quadrant. So go to 7 pi fourths, and I look for I forget what we're looking for, tangent. So I go to the outside value here is negative 1. So the tangent of negative pi fourths equals negative 1. So go ahead and try that with cosecant of 19 pi over 6 and secant of negative 3 pi over 2. And if we can get the video paused at this time to give them a second to do that. Okay, so for cosecant of 19 pi 6, you should have subtracted 2 and seen that that's in the same place as 7 pi over 6. So I would go here, and I'm using cosecant, which is the flip of sine, so negative 1 over 2 flipped, so this would be negative 2 over 1, or you can just call that negative 2. And then for the secant, if I add 2 pi to the negative 3 halves, I get 1 half, or pi over 2. So if I go to pi over 2, secant is the flip of cosine. Now my cosine here is 0. 0 is another way of just saying 0 divided by 1. So if I try and flip that, I get 1 over 0, which I can't do. I cannot divide by 0. So the secant of negative 3 pi over 2 would be undefined, because I cannot flip over 0. Flipping over 0 doesn't make another 0, right? 0 over 1 is not the same thing as 1 over 0. I can't ever do 1 over 0. Anytime I try to divide by 0, it becomes undefined. On the next slide, we're kind of going backwards. So now it is giving us a sine value. So in the first one, it's saying the sine of some angle is square root of 3 over 2. And so it wants to know what's the angle. Now that's why it says find the angle or value here. They're saying you can give that to them in either degrees or radians. I'm going to stick with radians right now, but you can write, well, we'll go through both of them actually, degrees and radians, because they're on the same triangle. So sine of theta, sine of some angle, is square root of 3 over 2, is really saying at what radian or what degree is the y value square root of 3 over 2. So I'll go to my unit circle, and I will look for all the places that the y value is square root of 3 over 2. And there will be multiple places. So y is square root of 3 over 2 right here, but it's also square root of 3 over 2 right here. And those are the only places that my y value will be that, because on the opposite side, my y value is going to be negative. And then even over here on the x, that's the x value, not the y value. So there's two places. And in radians, I would say pi over 3. In degrees, I would say 60 degrees. And also, in radians, I'd say 2 pi over 3, or 120 degrees. So I'm going to go back to my slide. So for sine of square root of 3 over 2, I have multiple answers that I can write there. But I have to make sure I get all of the places where it is. So let's say we're using radians. Then I would say it's pi over 3. And it's also 2 pi over 3. So it would be both of those. If I were to answer it in degrees, then I would say 60 degrees or 120 degrees. So then if I'm trying to find cosine of negative 1/2, now I'm looking for where are all the places that the x value is negative 1/2. So I'll go to my circle. I'm looking for x's that are negative 1/2. So I find one here, and I find one here. So two places, and I would either call them 2 pi over 3 or 4 pi over 3. Or if I was talking in degrees, I would say 120 degrees or 240 degrees. So I'm just going to stick to radians for now. So I'll have to list so many. And just go on what your directions say, whether they want it in radians or degrees. If they don't tell you, use radians. So in radians, the cosine of negative 1/2 is at 2 pi over 3 over 3, and also at 4 pi over 3. The next says, where is the tangent of theta undefined? So I want to know where all the places that my tangent value says undefined. So I'll go back over here, and undefined shows up at the top at pi over 2, and down at the bottom for tangent at 3 pi over 2. So that's what I would put for my tangent. Go ahead and try the next three on the other side. Keep in mind, these are cosecant, secant, and cotangent, so I'll have to flip my values to see All right, well, if I want cosecant of theta and I want to know where's that -2, really what I'm looking for is where is the sine -1/2? Where is that flipped at? So go through and do those 3 problems, and then we'll come back and you can check your answers, and if you'll pause the video at this time. Okay, so those are the answers right there. For cosecant of -2, you should have got 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. I don't know what that little mark is. That's not supposed to be there. It should just be 11 pi over 6. The secant of 2 over the square root of 3 is really asking, where is the cosine square root of 3 over 2? So that would be at pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. Then the last one is really asking, where is the tangent square root of 3? So that would be at pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. So the last thing we're going to do today is this is giving you the same idea, right? You're asking really here, where is the x value square root of 3 over 2, or negative square root of 3 over 2. But instead of like having 2 answers, this sets kind of some bounds so that I only get one answer for the problem. And that's when I see those 0 and theta and the pi and the greater than or equal to, what that's saying is, where is x negative square root of 3 over 2, but only look between 0 and pi. So when I go to my unit circle, I'll look for all the negative square root of 3 over 2, but I can only look between 0 and pi. So if I look at my unit circle, here's 0, here's pi. So I'm looking at all the top half of my plate, greater than 0 but smaller than 1 pi. And so then I can only use these top values to look for negative square root of 3 over 2. And I find that x value right here, and it is also down here, negative square root of 3 over 2 also shows up at 7 pi over 6, but that's not in between 0 and pi. So the only place this really works is at 5 pi over 6. Now my second one wants to know, where is the tangent negative square root of 3 over 3? And so it only wants me to look between negative pi halves and pi halves. So I know pi halves is up here. And then negative pi halves, if I'm working with coterminals, my 3 pi over halves is the same thing. It's just a counterclockwise rotation of 1/4. So in between here and here is where I'm looking. And I'm looking for a tangent value of negative square root of 3 over 3. And the only place that happens on the right-hand side of my plate, bigger than negative halves, pi halves, smaller than pi halves, is right here. So that would be at 11 pi over 6. And again, that also happens at this value over here. But that's not on the right-hand side of my plate where I said I had to look. Okay, that's all for today. Hopefully this helps you know how to use your plate besides just having it there. Like I mentioned before, you will have your plate on your formative. You won't have it on your summative. And we'll do some unit circle quizzes to try and help get you ready for memorizing it piece by piece. But just know that that is coming up. I was going to give you guys some more extra practice, just in-class practice that you had to do, but I decided that was a little bit overkill, so you just have your homework, but you should be able to finish your entire homework assignment and get it turned in this class period. So make sure you're working on that, and don't make me regret not giving you more problems. Hope you guys have a really good day, and I will see you when I get back.